We believe that God is calling some of us to adopt. And that's an expensive thing for families to adopt. And so our heart is, could we establish a fund where when families from our church want to adopt, they could apply for a grant to help make that possible, and we could help rescue some of these orphans together. That's a part of what we're going to believe God to do through us and through our giving, through our sacrifice.
Hey guys, we're the Rogers from the Clinton campus. We just want to say thank you to Pinelake for all the support we received for the adoption.
Hey Pinelake, we're the Graham family at the Reservoir campus. Thank you all so much for your support and helping bring Olivia home.
We are the Blackburn family and we attend the Reservoir campus. And we just want to thank Pinelake for all the support during our adoption.
Hey, we're the Pope family from the Reservoir campus, and we just want to thank Pinelake for supporting us through every step of our adoption.
We just really appreciate all the support that Pinelake's given us over the years.
Thank you to Pinelake for all the support in our adoption.
We're thankful for all that they've done for us. We'd just like to thank the church for all the support in our adoption process.
Well, welcome everybody to Love First, and man, I'm so thankful for this day. I'm so thankful for that young preacher who was on the screen there at the beginning of the deal in 2011, right? It's a great day for us as we come today to celebrate, not that we love God first, but that God loved us first, and that because He loved us first, now we can love Him back in return, and we can share His love with people around us. So every year, we take a Sunday out of the year to just focus on a group of people that we believe are near to the heart of God, those who many times are overlooked or somehow left behind in the culture or in the world's view. And so this year we have chosen this idea of adoption to be our theme. And in the next few minutes, my prayer is that you will feel informed about why it is that we have stepped toward adoption, that you'll hopefully be inspired to maybe take a next step, to be open to sharing the love of God that you've received with the people around you. But my prayer also is that you will not just consider it, but that before you leave here today or over the next couple of days, that God would lead you to take a step of inclusion where you're actually joining the fight to love the overlooked and to love the least of these as a part of your following of Jesus Christ on a daily basis, okay? So why are we choosing this idea of adoption this year as our theme? And I'm going to give you two reasons why we're choosing it. Number one, it's God's picture, okay? We're choosing adoption because it's God's picture of what He's done for you. Adoption is a picture. It's one of the ways the Bible describes what God has done on your behalf and my behalf. Now, in the Old Testament, the Bible doesn't speak much about adoption, about caring for the least of these. In the Old Testament, the primary picture of caring for people who are in need is the family. God's design is that the family unit be the place where most needs are met. And so when you think about orphan care in the Bible, in God's plan, think about Esther, right? Her mom and dad passed away. Who was she cared for by? She was cared for in her extended family by an elder cousin named Mordecai. That's the way, kind of in the Old Testament Jewish model and mindset, that's the way people were cared for when they were in need. But that doesn't mean that there were not pictures of adoption. I can think of two pictures of adoption in the Old Testament. The first one, maybe you remember, the first adoption that I know of in the Bible was Moses. Anybody remember the story of Moses? Come on, y'all probably went to Bible school whenever you were a little kid. You remember the story of Moses, that he's an Israelite born into in captivity in Egypt. The law had been passed that all the male babies had to be disposed of, killed, but Moses' mom loved him so much she couldn't do it. And so she risked her life by hiding Moses until he couldn't be hidden anymore. And then she came up with a plan to make a boat out of a basket, place baby Moses in that basket, and then strategically place him near to where Pharaoh's daughter took baths in the Nile River. And whenever the daughter of Pharaoh came to bathe, here came baby Moses floating in the basket. She finds the basket, opens it up, there's a baby, and she adopts him, right? Baby Moses is adopted as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. The Pharaoh in that day was considered a god. Moses is taken from a death sentence to be raised as a child of God, right? That's the picture. And that picture becomes a picture of us. You and I are born under a death sentence, all of us separated from God. God loved us too much to leave us there. He adopts us through his son, Jesus, and now we get to be raised as sons and daughters of God. It's a picture of what God does for us. Maybe you remember that story. Maybe you don't remember another adoption in the Bible of sorts where King David ascends to the throne as the king of Israel, and he desires to do a kindness of covenant faithfulness for his best friend, a guy named Jonathan. Now, if you know much about David's life, you know he was anointed king a long time before he became king. And in that gap between his anointing and the time he became king, King Saul, who was the king at the time, tried to kill David, right? But Saul had a son named Jonathan who recognized the hand of God on David, who became best friends with David. And David and Jonathan made a covenant that they would always try to care for each other. When Saul and Jonathan were both killed in battle and David ascended to the throne, he asked, does Jonathan have a living heir? Now, this was very unusual, not unusual in a way, because when a king ascended to the throne, he wanted to know of any rival heir who might come after him. That was not unusual. What was unusual is that David didn't kill the heir, he wanted to bless him. And so they asked, does Jonathan have an heir? And they said, yes, he has a son, but through a tragic accident when he was a baby, he was dropped. He's lame in both legs. And so David said, bring him to me. And I'm sure many objected and said, but David, he can never do anything for you. David said, it does not matter. Though he may have been born an enemy of mine, and though he cannot do anything for me, I'm going to be faithful to a covenant I made to his father. Bring him to me. And so Mephibosheth, the kid, his name means, has a meaning around the idea of shame. This kid who was draped in a name of shame is brought to David's table, fed every day, and given an inheritance he never deserved. You and I, it's a picture. You and I are like Mephibosheth. All of us are crippled, all of us born enemies of God. The Bible says we're born in disobedience to God, children of wrath. And yet God, though we could never do anything for him, though we rightfully should be killed, he loves you enough to adopt you, to bring you to his table, to show you kindness and inheritance through his son, Jesus, who is a descendant of David. It's a picture. You get it? So adoption is a picture of God's relationship with us. In the Old Testament, it wasn't mentioned much, but in the New Testament, when you begin to read the letters of Paul wrote to a Greek and then Roman culture where adoption was quite prevalent. It was prominent in their day. Not in the Jewish culture. Most Jewish writers writing to Jewish audiences would talk about being born again, right? Because the family is where you were taken care of. But Paul writing to this Roman culture in like Galatians, Ephesians, or Romans introduces them to this concept biblically of adoption. The method, the procedure by which a person born outside of a family actually was welcomed into the family legally. So Paul would write things like this in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 4. It says, in love, God, predestined us to adoption as sons through Jesus Christ to himself according to the kind intention of his will. You didn't deserve it, right? You were an enemy. You can do anything for God. But because he had kindness toward you through Jesus, he adopts you as his child. Writing in the book of Romans, Paul talks about this new life we're given, that you're given. And he says this in Romans 8, verse 15. For you have not received a spirit of slavery leading to fear again, but you've received a spirit of adoption as sons by which you get to cry out, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifying with our spirit that we are children of God. The scripture tells us that God allows you to call him Father. In the Old Testament, that word is never used of God. A lot of names, but never is God called Father. But when Jesus comes, almost every time he speaks of God, he calls him Father. And now you are called a child of God through the spirit of adoption. Now, in the New Testament, in Roman adoption, there were 4 aspects of it. I'm going to give you 3 of them real quick, and then we're going to talk about the 4th one at the end of the message, okay? Here's the first aspect of adoption. When a kid was adopted, when a person was adopted, their past was totally erased. Whoever they were, whatever they had done, wherever they had been, whatever debts they had accumulated, everything was gone. Their name was changed. Their past was taken care of. Whatever debts they had accumulated, everything was gone. Second aspect is they were given a new life. They were given a new name. They were placed in a new family. They were given new responsibilities. Everything about their life was made new. A do-over. Old things gone, everything made new. The third aspect is they became an heir. And that's really the idea of adoption in the first century. That's really what people who were adopting wanted. They didn't adopt babies for the most part. Most adoptions were adult kids. Kids in their teens or kids in their 20s or maybe even older, because families without an heir wanted an heir, so they would find someone who was worthy maybe to be adopted that they could leave their inheritance to. That's why Paul says, listen, God has made us not just children, Romans 8:17, but as children we're heirs also, heirs of God, fellow heirs with Christ, if indeed we suffer with him, so that we might also be glorified with him. You see, it's a picture. Adoption's a picture of what God has done for us, but it's also God's plan. God's picture and his plan, what God wants to do through you. God's heart is for the poor, the oppressed, and the overlooked. James 1:27 says, pure and undefiled religion in the sight of God, of our God and Father, is this, to visit orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself unstained by the world. Yes, be different from the world, but give love to the least of these. Jesus talked about judgment, the end of time in Matthew 25. Separation of sheep and goats, he would say. People who did what he wanted and those who didn't do what he wanted. And this is the way he made a distinction in the people who were caring for folks who were in prison or sick or hurting. Matthew 25:40, the king will answer and say to them, truly I say to you, to the extent that you did it to one of these brothers of mine, even the least of these, you did it to me. So all through the Bible, God says, care for the poor, the oppressed, the person who is in need. Right now in the world, according to which group you listen to, there are about 153 million orphans worldwide. There are 437,000 children in the U.S. that are under some type of orphan care, either through the state or through orphanages. In Mississippi, 4,800 children right now are under some type of orphan care, and 491 kids are available right now legally for adoption within our state. God says, I want my people to care for the least, the overlooked, the hurting, and the orphan. So that's why we're stepping toward this idea of adoption, because we're identifying with the picture of God that he's given to us, and we're stepping into the plan that God has for his children to share the love that we've received. He loved us first, and so now we're sharing that love. What I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce you to some of your church family that have taken this call from God to adopt, and they've adopted children, and I want you to hear from them about their journey and what that has looked like for them. So would you turn your attention to the screen right now and hear about these 3 families?
My name's Jody Schmeltzer. I'm the campus pastor for Pinelake in Oxford. This is my wife, Allison, and our family. This is Callie Grace. This is Caroline, Katie, and Carson. During Outlive Your Life, God called us to adoption. So we adopted our baby girl, Caroline Faith, from Ethiopia back in 2013. And we just want to say thank you so much, Pinelake family, for helping us bring our daughter home.
Hey Pinelake family, my name is David and this is Amy. We're the Horner family. Our son Robbie is 11 years old. Our son Daniel is 9 years old. Grace is 8. We adopted her about 6 years ago from southern China. Kara May was adopted September of 2018, so she's been with us a little over a year. She's 6 years old. We've been attending Pine Lake's Reservoir campus for over 15 years.
And we just want to thank you, Pine Lake family, for being a part of our adoption story and bringing our girls home. Thank you so much.
Hey Pine Lake, we're the Bates family. I'm Cliff, this is my wife Amy, my son Ellis, 16, Owen is 14, and Levi is 7. We've been a part of the Pine Lake family for 19 years and with the Madison campus for 13.
We adopted Levi when he was 1 day old from Augusta, Georgia, and we would just like to thank Pine Lake for encouraging us to step out and answer this calling to adopt.
Pine Lake family, would you give it up for these families who have taken this step of faith to adopt? Indeed, man, I'm so thankful for you guys, for your life and for your partnership here at Pine Lake. Genuinely, man, you know, we've done a lot of life together over the years, and I can honestly say I've never been more proud of you guys and your faith journey than watching you respond to this call of God on your life to adopt. And thank you for sharing with us, your journey with us today. To adopt is not an easy thing to decide to do. It's got to be more than just a cool idea, because that's going to wear off real quick. It's got to be a little bit deeper than that. And Jody and Allison, I know you guys really been Allison on your heart for a long, long time. Share with us just a little bit about this idea of how does a family wind up adopting a child?
Well, for me, growing up in Tupelo, I got a chance to see international adoption firsthand from a family that had 3 biological children that adopted a baby girl from China. So I think God birthed that little spark in me for adoption a long time ago. Well, I met Jody at Ole Miss, and we started dating, and I kind of mentioned him, hey, I might want to adopt one day, and he seemed on board, so we got married later. But, you know, life started happening and got busy. We had 3 babies in 3.5 years, and the topic of adoption just honestly didn't come back up. But one day, while the kids were asleep, I was on the computer and stumbled upon a blog from a family in Nashville that had 4 biological children and had adopted a baby girl from Ethiopia. And I felt that stirring again from the Lord about adoption. But I was honestly a little fearful now to go to Jody about this. But I prayed about it for really 6 months before I went to him and just kind of told him what God was kind of showing me, that I think this was his plan for our family. And I was interested to see if God would put the same call on his life.
Yeah, and so for me, when Allison first came to me and just said, hey, Jody, I feel like the Lord's stirring something in our hearts, or my heart, towards adoption, I looked at her and thought, okay, we got 3 kids, we're planting a church, and I started saying to myself, Lord, are you in this, or is my wife just gone crazy? You know, it's kind of one of those moments. And so what I committed to Allison was I said, look, I will pray about this. I'm going to have an open heart, an open mind, and I'm going to start praying. Well, Chip, one of the things that you've always challenged us with is that when we open God's Word, His voice is going to primarily speak to us through His Word. And so the very next morning after Allison had come to me in our L3 reading for the day, we were in Psalm 41. And Psalm 41:1 says, blessed is the man who considers the helpless, for God will deliver him in a day of trouble. And so one of the things that the Lord just began to reveal to me in that moment was that there's very few things that are more helpless than an orphan. Mm-hmm. And so God just began to stir in my heart just this desire to be in the same lane, on the same page that Allison was in. And so I came to her that night and just said, babe, I'm all in. I'm ready to start moving forward with our process.
That's so good, so good. And I just did the math in my head. 3 kids in 3.5 years. Sounded like y'all needed some cable TV or something up in y'all's house. Something to do around here. But it is. Look, it's great that God called you that. Look, you had kids, but there was a calling on your life. And listen, you're going to need the calling. You need to know that God is calling you into this, because it's not always easy, and there are anxieties and apprehensions that are quite normal. Cliff and Amy, I know you guys experienced a little bit of that, Cliff, even up to the day that you were going to get your son.
We did. So, you know, Outlive was really the spark for us. And at that point, we kind of sat down and said, okay, we're feeling the call. Let's take a year and pray through this. Yeah. And make sure that this is God's will, right? So we did, and that year was just incredible. I mean, confirmations all the way, to the point to where at the end of the year, we kind of came together and said, okay, this is so clear it's God's call that if we don't do this, it's disobedience. Wow. And when I would take it to him in prayer, I mean, I could see me in front of the Lord and the Lord saying, I provided everything for you to do this. If you don't do this, you're disobeying me. Yeah. So that gave us the confidence to step into this thing and go. We adopted Levi from Georgia, so we had about an 8-hour drive. Well, we get in the car to go drive, and we're just confident. I mean, there's no fear, there's no anxiety. But if I'm honest, for me, if I check myself, I thought, okay, how am I going to see him? Am I going to see him the same way I see my other two biological kids? And I really didn't know, if I'm honest. Yeah. And when we got there, the day we saw him, God covered it all. Yeah. I mean, completely covered it. So I want to say if there's somebody out there considering adoption and you're worried about that, God covers that completely.
He does. He meets you. And look, that's just one of a lot of challenges along the way. It's not easy, right? We're called to follow the Lord. It's not always an easy path, but God does intend to meet us, and He meets us. He shows up Himself, but sometimes He uses people along the way to help us too. David and Amy, I know that's part of y'all's story. As you were on this journey, you needed folks, and your small group was really there for you guys. Tell us how they came around you guys in that adoption process.
Yes, well, I had also had a heart for adoption since I was probably a teenager, and so David and I discussed that, and we had said, sure, that would be something along the way we would do. But fast forward a few years, David was a teacher and a coach, and I'm a stay-at-home mom with two small boys at 3 and 1, and that just kind of faded behind because it was like, how in the world could we ever possibly afford an adoption? It can be very costly. And so we just kind of had it just in the back of our minds, but it wasn't going to happen. And so then Outlive Your Life came, and the adoption Sunday, we came home and said, okay, this is something that we really need to start praying about, but we still saw it in our future. And so that next Sunday we came down and we took our rock and we were saying yes to adoption. And we went to our small group that night and just told everybody, and they were excited, and we all shared what we were committing. But and just a few days later, one of the couples from our small group came to us and said, we feel like our Outlive Your Life is to be participating financially in your adoption. And we were just blown away. We couldn't believe that God, here was my greatest fear. How could I afford this adoption? He was already meeting it at that point. And so then fast forward a year and a half, we had all the money at every point to pay each payment that we had. And then we got matched with our daughter, and we were just so thrilled. We could not wait to go to China to get her, and yet there was that fear that rose up again. The payments that we had made in total, we were about to have to make those same amount of payments before we could go get Grace in September. And I just was not sure. There was just no way we could do it. But God at the same time was working in our small group. And Tim and Brianna Sensing and Deb Watson started throwing around ideas for different fundraisers, and then they just decided to do them all, I think. So in one day, we had we called it our Grace party at Pump It Up. People came, many of y'all came to jump, to eat barbecue, to buy T-shirts, and even a silent auction. And in that one day, we raised enough money for all of those payments. And it just floored us. We couldn't believe. We were standing there just amazed at what God had done. And He just impressed upon me that He who began a good work is faithful to complete it.
It's really amazing when you hear, David and Amy are praying about adopting, but really through Outlive Your Life, which was an initiative that we did, all of us were on board saying, God, what would you have us do? So it's amazing just to hear how the faith family, listen, you may not be called to adopt today, but God may be about to stir something within you to kind of do what happened with their small group, that you could come around folks who are adopting in a significant way. I know your small group did that, but then it was like you had a family, a couple that really came around you and almost adopted you as adopters. David, tell us just a little bit about that and what that looked like.
So it's God's story, and He's letting us walk it out, and we're getting to be a part of it. And as a part of that, He's provided along the way in every way. And so when we return from China, we get off the plane. It's an incredible celebration. It's a high, and it's easy at that point. But I think any parent would know, no matter the circumstances, raising kids is hard. And so our parents both live out of state. And so God used our small group, but specifically Deb and Warner Watson and people like them, to provide for us and love us and really come alongside us, whether it was meals or encouraging texts or being there for us, having intentional conversations to remind us of the story that we were walking out when we needed reminding of that. Sometimes when there's dishes piled high and stresses and trying to get to church on time, you don't remember those things, and God used them specifically in that way. And I think I can say confidently that these girls have blessed them as much as they've blessed us.
Yeah, it's just amazing to see how that's blessed you. And like you're saying, it's a blessing to them too. It is stressful. It can be a challenge, but also know that God has shown up, right? He's met you. You guys can look back at markers where whenever you needed him, he showed up. And Amy, I know you and Cliff saw that. There was some apprehension in going to Georgia, but there was also some breakthrough. And God was just winking at you, so to speak, to let you know that he saw you guys and even past that. Tell us just a little bit about how God's met you guys and shown up in your life and in your family.
Yeah, so many significant ways that the Lord showed up, but one of the ones that just stands out to us and we will never forget is getting to meet the birth mom. And the agency we went with had kind of cautioned us to be careful about how much of our faith we shared with her, and just because we didn't know where she stood. But God had a different plan, and he had us walk right into being able to share Jesus with her. And then she asked for us to pray over her. And so Cliff went into action, and I was sobbing, and he stood behind her, put his hands on her shoulders, and I got to kneel at her feet and just hold her like a mother would, and just had a lot of healing tears for her and got to speak words of life over her. And so that was just an amazing, significant moment that we were not expecting. And the next day when we signed the paperwork, we were able to pray over she and his birth father, the four of us in a circle, and we will never, ever forget that. And then another significant way that God showed up, we didn't know until a few years later, but a family member came to us and said that they were ashamed, but they had been praying for several years from some healing from racial prejudice. And they said that God had used Levi to completely heal their heart and just not stop there, but after they repented from that, then they have now become an advocate for racial healing in others. And so God's just used Levi in amazing ways.
Yep. And God does. He shows up like that. And listen, it's a difficult journey. It's a messy process at times. Not every adoption story is that clean like you guys experienced. But God is faithful. And he's doing things that you really can't even expect that he was up to in healing your family, extended family, us as a church family. And it's just so good to watch God at work. And I believe God wants to continue to do that even now. And maybe you're sitting here thinking, man, I don't know, Chip. I'm not sure that's really for me. I'm a college student, or we're past having kids, or whatever it is. But if God's stirring, listen, you don't have to adopt. There are lots of ways you could be involved. But Jody, if there are folks who are thinking, maybe God's stirring something, what would you say to just your church family as a whole if folks are out there thinking, man, God may be stirring something in me? How would you speak to them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that a couple of things that I would share would be, one, and I think you've heard it consistently here over the last few minutes, is that the calling to adoption is not about anyone up here, okay? It's God's calling. It's his story. It's about his calling, his faithfulness, and ultimately it's about his glory. And so one of the things I would encourage you guys in is, if you're considering praying through adoption, is if you're married, first and foremost, be on the same page with your spouse, okay? Very, very important that you don't step into an adoption journey flying solo, okay? It's just not one of those things where you say, hey, I'm all in, and then you try to drag your spouse alongside of you. It just doesn't work that way. And so just really want to encourage you to pray through that season, make sure you're on the same page before you move forward. The second thing I would say is, just start to open God's Word. If it's not something that's a part of your daily walk with the Lord right now, I would say that it's going to be primary for you, that God's going to speak to you first and foremost through His Word, and He'll give you confirmations. He'll give you clarity on your next steps as you open His Word and meet with Him. Another part of this, I would say, get a journal. Make sure you have something that you're able to write down, different ways that God is speaking to you through your adoption journey. As you're praying through this, Start writing down specific ways that God has shown up. You're going to need that, because when you get through difficult parts of the journey, when you're hitting roadblocks or when the enemy's trying to attack in some way, you're going to need those confirmations as anchors to look back on and just be reminded of his calling and his faithfulness. The last really quick thing that I'd share with you is invite some people into your story. Let people into your story, into your life, into this adoption journey with you. You're going to need their encouragement and their support in order to move forward with what God's called you to do.
just amazing, and I agree with all of those things. And listen, adopting is something that maybe God's laying on your heart, but there's even other things past that, past just adopting or adopting an adoptive family. There are other ways for you to be involved. You're going to hear about that in just a moment, but for right now, Pine Lake family, would you give it up? Would you thank these folks for coming and sharing their story with us? Indeed. Would you turn your attention to the screen as we see a video introducing Mike and Lori Sally and Show Mercy Ministries.
Hi, I'm Lori, and this is my husband, Mike, Sally. We attend the Pinelake Clinton campus, and we are the founders of Show Mercy International.
Show Mercy was founded in 2004 when we had an opportunity to go on a short-term mission trip. We focus on 3 major areas of ministry. Number 1 is childcare and orphan development and sponsorship. We work with children that are the most vulnerable in the community, provide opportunities for them to really see God use them and live a life on purpose. Second is village outreach. That includes a medical clinic, a birthing center, maternity ward, as well as various other outreaches like prison ministry, ministry to elderly and widows, and finally, mission teams. We believe that everybody should have an opportunity to go on a mission trip to really see not only the impact that they'll make on others, but most importantly, the impact that God will have on them.
Pine Lake family, would you welcome Mike and Lori Sally today with us? Man, thank you guys so much. And thank you for, man, just your life and the way God's using you. You're part of our family. You're at our Clinton campus right now. And yet you've got this ministry in Uganda. That's where Show Mercy is located. If you don't know much about Uganda, just quickly, it's in Africa. It's a country in Africa. There are some really happening places like Kampala, where you just look just like any other Western city, but there are also places of a lot of poverty, a lot of need there. Average age, Mike has told me, average age in Uganda is about 16 years old, average income about $600 a year. And so it's a lot. There are many needs in that country that God's called you guys to. But Show Mercy is more than just meeting physical needs. Talk to us just a little bit about how Show Mercy is unique in its purpose.
Well, when we first, like Mike mentioned in the video, we went on a missions trip in 2004. And honestly, I didn't want to go on that missions trip. He kind of like he had been on a missions trip and he's like, you've got to go. Our kids were little and his heart was so touched by seeing these orphans, and he knew like, if my kids were orphaned, would somebody step up and do something? So his message was inspirational, but I was like, I'm a mom. Like, what do I have to offer? I don't know if I can go. Well, God convinced me to go. I prayed about it, and I went. And everything that we do at Show Mercy is based off of just our experience. So we had opportunities to go out into the community. We went to Uganda, actually, in the community, and share our faith. And so we're different in that we want to inspire people to come with us, to cross their chicken line. I had a big chicken line. I sat in church every Sunday. I heard the message. I got all inspirational, and I shared within my local community, but I'd never really thought I could share the gospel, and I had a chance to do it. And I think God ministered more to me on that trip than he did to others. So our heart is we want to have people come, step out, get past your chicken line, and put feet to your faith.
Yeah, your chicken line. So some of y'all chicken, right? So you got to get past your chicken line, right? What you are afraid of. And it's God calling you. Listen, this may be a place where God's calling you to cross a threshold of your faith where you're taking a next step. And so it is. Part of the purpose of Show Mercy is to help you discover your purpose, but it's also helping these kids and families discover theirs. And so part of what we want to do in 2020 and beyond is to have some trips where we go as a faith family and try to show mercy and show God's love through these compassion trips. So Mike, talk to us a little bit about what kind of stuff would we be doing as we're going to Uganda, helping with you guys. What type of stuff would we be doing? What kind of needs are there?
Yeah, so I believe that God likes to use ordinary people to do extraordinary things, and we're ordinary people. So a lot of times when you're thinking about a mission trip, you might be thinking, only if I'm qualified, only if I've gone to school as a missionary, but there's so many opportunities for you to get involved. And I want to encourage everybody here to pray about coming on a trip. If you like to hang out with kids, you like to minister to kids, we have orphan care available. If you have a heart for widows, the verse that you mentioned in James 1:27 says visiting orphans and widows in their distress. And so if you care about widows, if you want to sit and listen to an elderly tell you a story about their life, come and join us. If you're a medical personnel, we have a medical clinic in the village that serves thousands of people every year. We just opened a birthing center, which we're really excited about, a place for pregnant moms to come and receive discipleship throughout their whole pregnancy and then be able to birth their babies in a clean environment. Prison ministry, some of you, I believe we did prisons last year, didn't we? If somebody is interested in prisons, we visit a prison every year and are able to encourage people in that really difficult time for them. So there's so many opportunities. Agriculture as well, farming. Some of the guys, it's hard to get some of the guys to go on these mission trips, and I really want to encourage you guys that there's something for you. We could work on some special projects, some small construction projects to help some people, maybe with water catch systems, things like that, because a lot of people, actually nobody in our village has running water except for our base.
Wow.
So there's a lot of opportunities to get involved.
Yeah, so if we got folks who like to grow a garden, they could come learn or come help folks learn how to even do some things like that, I know, on your base. So a lot of need, a lot of opportunity for you to go and be a part of that. But I know you also have a special project that's on your heart right now, a Dream Center. So share with us just a little bit, what is the Dream Center and kind of what do you hope to accomplish through this building of this Dream Center?
So we have over 350 children in our sponsorship program, and so that enables the children to go to good quality schools. We gather them every Saturday and play with them, give them a healthy meal, disciple them. But we know that you become who you hang out with. So we wanted to create a center where these children can come. Unfortunately, living in poverty, they have to grow up really fast. They don't have opportunities to play and have joy and be a kid and develop social skills. And so we want to create this place where they can come. And we're going to have, right now we have a tutoring program, so we're going to expand that in this building. We want to put a computer lab. We want to create a place where they can play, have air hockey and foosball, and create a stage where they can worship and see movies, and have a place where missions teams can come and share their personal story. You'd be shocked. Some of the people in Uganda, they think just because we're in America, everything's perfect. And when you start telling them your personal story, they're just in awe, and it brings hope to them. The other aspect is we want to do some vocational training. And our heart, everything that we do, all of our outreaches aren't just because there's a need. We did them, and we were impacted ourselves, and our hearts were moved to do them. And so when I was on a trip a couple of summers ago, my team was taking me out to go meet some of the children that had lost a dad. And I met this one mom, and her husband, her and her husband were Muslim, and they had recently committed their life to the Lord. And unfortunately, her husband died on Christmas Day. And so her heart was wrecked. So it wasn't too long after that I showed up. And so here I am. I'm talking to this mom. She's broken. We're helping some of her children already. But my heart as a mother was like, how can we help you? Sending your kids to school, I know, is a part, but how can we help you? And so I was talking to her, and her heart was just so broken. And actually, she was so a little angry at God. She had just given her life. They had just given their life to Jesus. And I got to share a little bit of my faith with her and a little encouragement, and it brought hope to her. So it's about families too. So this Dream Center will be a place where families can come, not just the children.
Yeah. So it's a place, if you're hearing that, it's a place where we're going to do ministry with orphans and with kids, but it's also a place where we want to do ministry with adults, so that these kids can go back to a family and stay with their families and not just be considered an orphan, because they get that tag and that label sometimes in that culture, but really to help the families, strengthen the families. And so for some of you, that may resonate with you. Maybe not to adopt a child, but to go and to strengthen a family, train a family, help a family, know how to keep their family unit intact, man. That's an amazing, amazing thing. Thank you guys for what you're doing and for sharing your life and your journey with us. Pinelake family, would you thank Mike and Lori for what they're doing today? Guys, thank you so much. Absolutely. So what is it that you could do? How could you be a part of this idea of making a difference with the overlooked and the least of these? And that's really kind of the way I want to wrap this day up, is just by encouraging you to think about what your part in this plan could be. Now think with me for a second. God has given grace to you. You were far from God. You were without hope. You were an enemy. You couldn't do anything for God. And yet God chose to come and through his son Jesus to adopt you, just like Moses was adopted, to care for you, just like David cared for Mephibosheth, right? That though we were sons of disobedience and children of God's wrath, God made you to be a son or a daughter of his. That's God's love for you. No, you ought to receive that love. You ought to relish that love. God thinks that way about you. He's loved you first. But God also has called you to be a part of His plan now to share His love and this picture with the world around you. So could I ask you, would you open up your heart just like you heard some of these folks talking about outlive your life and how that was a time where they prayed what God would do in their lives and then they took steps of obedience. Would you right now on Love First Sunday, would you take a minute just to say, God, are you trying to call me into something past me? Into your plan to care for the widow, the orphan, the hurting, the broken, the forgotten, the overlooked? Because God may have a place for you. Certainly that might be adoption. And I pray that you're not fearful of that. I pray that you're not living, scared, oh my gosh, our window's closed. No, if God is speaking, you should have an open spirit. God, show me. And maybe it is that God would say to you, I want you and your family to expand and have a forever family now. And so if that's you, listen, we want to help you take that next step. We'll walk with you in this journey. But maybe you're sitting here and you're thinking, that's not really what God's calling me to, but maybe God would call you secondly to say, you know what, I want to adopt an adopted family. We're not going to adopt, but you know what? I would love to come around a young couple. I'd love to come around a family to encourage them, to be there for them, to be at birthday parties or to be at ball games. And though I wouldn't really use this language, but whenever I was growing up in Louisiana, everybody in the Catholic Church had godparents, right? They weren't really your parents, but they were just somebody special close to you that was there for you if you ever needed them. Maybe God would use you to be kind of like that. God's gift of adopters for the adopting, right? That you could come around and be a support. If you have an interest in that, we want to help you take a next step in loving people who are doing the adoption. Another way that you could be a part of this is, listen, you could adopt a college student through the holidays. Now, some college students are thinking, yeah, adopt me. I want somebody to adopt me for the holidays, right? Here's the idea of that. All right, a lot of kids at our college campuses across the state come from a long way away, and I don't mean the coast, okay? I mean they're like from a long way away in the U.S. Many of them come from overseas, and they're not going home for Thanksgiving. Many of them won't even go home for Christmas. And so it's in our heart through our college ministry to identify students who might fit that profile, who are a long way from home, can't go home, but would really like a place to go for Thanksgiving lunch or to go for Christmas Day. And maybe God would stir within you just to open up your heart for the day to say, you know what, we have a spot at our table for someone to come and join our family, if just for the holidays. Now chill for just a second. We're really going to vet those folks before we bring them into your house, okay? We're going to do our best to make sure that you're getting connected to folks who are legit and on the open up. But on the other side of that, we're going to vet you too, okay? We ain't going to put no college kid in some crazy folk house. That's what I'm saying to you. But if God's stirring within you to say, you know what, man, we're going to be here already. Maybe this is a way for us just to show the love of God. He's loved us. He's done so much for us. Man, we'll create a spot at our table like David did in covenant faithfulness with Jonathan for Jonathan's son. Man, we could do that. And if you're interested in that, we'll help you take that step and find that right person to do that. Then the last thing is this. You just heard Mike and Lori sharing about going to Uganda and the things that are going on there and the need for a dream center. There are two ways you could be involved. One is, would you look at your schedule for 2020? There are going to be 4 opportunities for Pinelake families or individuals to go to Uganda and just serve. Go help show people how to grow a garden or go share your medical expertise, the things that Mike talked about. Would you think about going to give your life away for a week in Uganda? You could go. But if that's not a possibility for you, look, you may be a person who has been extraordinarily blessed by God, and you could say, you know what, I can't go, but I could give. Our church family we're taking on this idea of this dream center. It's going to cost $150,000 to build it. And I would love for our church family over the next 3 or 4 weeks to raise that money, for us to give that money, to see that become a reality. So would you pray about that? Would God stir within you as you think about your year-end giving over the next week or 2 or even to the end of the year? Would you consider giving toward this idea of seeing this dream center to help these kids, but also help these families so that these kids can stay with their families, okay? God's got a part for all of us to play. Now, earlier I told you there were 4 aspects of adoption in the first century culture. I gave you 3. The last one is this, right? You didn't just leave your old life and get a new life and become an heir. Here was the 4th aspect. It was permanent. When you were adopted in the first century, it was permanent. In the Roman mindset, whenever you birthed a child naturally, it was kind of out of your control. You kind of got what you got. And so in their mindset, if you didn't want your child, you could give it up for adoption, or it could become orphaned. But if you were choosing to adopt, and I told you that most people who were adopted were a little bit older, teenagers, even adults. You knew what you were getting. You had found a person that you wanted to invite into your family life. And so whenever you adopted in the first century, it was permanent. The new life was permanent. The sonship, the daughtership was permanent. You could never unadopt a child. And I wonder if that's not why Paul chose that in Romans 8 to say, you've been given a spirit of adoption. That yes, life is tough, and no, you're not perfect, and God has to work all things together for His good when we're called according to His purpose. But do you remember how he closes Romans 8? He says, I'm convinced that nothing will ever, ever, ever separate you from God's love. When you have been adopted by Jesus, you're adopted into His family forever. Can I just say to you, if you've never received God's love, if you've never been loved first, then today could be a day for you to say, Jesus, I need you. Come into my life. I want you to adopt me. Make me be your son, your daughter. God, I receive your love. My old is gone. Make me new. I want to be an heir of yours forever. Hey, could we do that across every campus, every venue right now? Could you just join me in prayer? And just with your heart open to God, would you just say to God, thank you? Could you thank God for His loving you? That He chose to love you, to not leave you, that He didn't forsake you, that He came for you. He sent Jesus to adopt you. Would you just receive that right now? Here you are in church. Would you just say, God, thank you for loving me like that? You don't feel very lovable. Neither was Mephibosheth. You've really done bad things maybe. You don't deserve it. Neither did Moses. He deserved death according to the law. And yet he was adopted in. God adopts you in to His family. Would you just thank Him for that? Would you receive it if you've never received it? And would you pray right now, God, is there something that you're calling me to personally? Or maybe my family to? Would you just ask that? God, would you show me? Is this from you? To adopt an adopter or a college student, or to go or to give? If there's something that God is stirring in you, would you just say, God, I'm open. I'm open. Whatever you call me to do, God, that's what I'm willing to do. Just a second, I'm going to close this time of prayer. We're going to have a time of response. We're going to sing a song to the Lord that just tells us that we're just going to tell Him that we're children of God. While we're singing this song, listen, if you have a need in your life, you want to be prayed for, if you want to give your life to Christ, there are going to be some people around the room who would love to pray with you. Would you just respond to God and to His love for you today? Father, we love you. We thank you for loving us first. God, would you let now this picture that you've given to us become the plan for our life? God, let us share your love with those around us. Lead us faithfully, God, in this journey. We bless you. We praise you. Receive our worship in Jesus' name. Amen.